members will invest time and strive to be better leaders. They are open to learning new ways to lead their teams and their organizations. And many leaders already excel when it comes to the qualities and attributes that come from the head, for example, intelligence, vision, and decisiveness. However, if you want to improve your leadership abilities and take your performance to the next level, you may also want to focus on the type of leadership qualities that come from the heart. Attributes like emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and mindfulness are essential to strong leadership, and so is compassion. We're here today to talk about compassionate leadership. Compassion is the opposite of indifference, and it is one of the essential qualities that determine if you are a decent human being or not. In fact, the word's origins mean to suffer with. Compassion involves not viewing others as separate entities. It means understanding what people are going through on a deeper level. I'm here today with Sean Adams, who is the Compassionate Leadership Consultant at the Irish Centre for Compassion Focused Therapy, and he's also the founder of Compassion Connects. You're very welcome, Sean.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me, Stephen.
And when we talked just before this interview, you said boards are custodians. What did you mean by this?
I just thought it was a good kind of phrase to actually try to encapsulate the responsibility that boards have. So they have a responsibility to serve and to lead. So a lot of that is dealing with immediate challenges, which is very much critical thinking, but it's also looking beyond that to the future, to a sustainable future beyond oneself, and that's more reflective thinking.
Very good. And can you sum up or define compassionate leadership?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll start with, if one is a compassionate leader, one needs to know what compassion is, which we might come on to. And then it's about embodying the true essence of it in a board strategy, and then permeating that throughout the whole organization, again, looking beyond oneself. So maybe to illustrate, maybe I could give the definition of compassion.
Sure.
So obviously there's a few different definitions, but it's basically a sensitivity to suffering and the wisdom and commitment to alleviate that suffering or prevent it. And so lots of people think it's about being kind or nice. Those ways of being compassionate, it's not compassion. There's one rather funny thing I found yesterday. If you Google compassionate leadership, the first thing that comes up on Google, which we might talk about later, are like show gratitude, be transparent. That's not compassion. Those things hopefully are happening anyway. So compassion means something very specific.
Okay, and you talk about compassionate leadership. How can leaders manage with compassion?
Basically, so the key word in compassion is cultivation. It's like a garden. You can either let it grow haphazardly or you can cultivate it. So you need real practice and skill in that cultivation. So for oneself and for others. So there's something called compassion focused therapy, which a lot of my ideas have come from. So a manager, once they are aware of those techniques, there's like visualization, breathing, how to understand emotions, how to regulate emotions, that can then, the manager can then confer that onto their team.
Okay, and what if your leadership team and maybe the culture of your organization haven't bought into this type of philosophy? They think it's a bit too airy-fairy.
Yeah.
It doesn't relate to the bottom line. How would you go about changing things?
I would do my best to explain about the actual science of compassion, explain some of the techniques involved and the importance of it. Because really, any board, think about the bottom line, what produces that bottom line? It's the people. So by the application of compassion in a very measured scientific way can actually optimize people's decision-making, creativity, get round bias and things like that. So there's loads of information out there if it's actually tangibly useful for the team and therefore the bottom line.
You're talking about culture here as well.
Yes, very much so.
Compassionate leadership and culture in an organization.
Yes.
How do you think that such a culture can positively affect the bottom line?
In the sense of maximizing the performance of the team. Simple as that.
Simple as that. It's they say that culture eats strategy, or culture eats strategy for breakfast, and that's
Yes.
if
Exactly.
people aren't bought into striving for the strategy. If they're not motivated, the strategy will fail.
Yeah, so the whole idea behind Compassion Connects is very much a strategy, values driven, culture driven. and that will then permeate down. So that might sound a bit airy-fairy, but there's actual tangible work that could be done. But the key point is understanding, do you want to get the most out of your key resource, which is your people, including yourself? And I would suggest that compassion would add huge value on that basis. That would then manifest in the bottom line.
Yeah. Are there any organizations or companies that you can point to that you feel demonstrate compassionate leadership?
Great question. So I did some research. Thank you for your earlier chat. LinkedIn. So the CEO of LinkedIn describes himself as a practitioner of compassionate management. And it's clear, I was looking at a lot of his writings and tweets and so on, he's studied the science of compassion. He's not talking about being kind or gentle. I mean, those are great things, but he's not doing it in that way. Also, absolutely fascinating research. Google set up a project called what's it called? I can't remember the name, but anyway, it was absolutely fabulous. Now, Google's completely data-driven. And the point they were seeking is Project Aristotle. How could I forget?
Compassion.
And the whole point was to work out what makes a great team as opposed to just an okay or functioning team. And the overriding data from Google, who probably know a bit about data analytics and so on, was it's the human qualities, compassion and trust. And those two things are obviously intertwined.
Yeah. And, boards currently are trying to get to grips with talent shortages in key sectors. We've all heard of the Great Resignation.
Yes.
What role do you feel compassionate leadership could play to fix this?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, if I might be so bold, I would suggest one key reason behind resignations and so on is with COVID and the pandemic and all the other awful things, we've generated a culture of micromanagement, facilitated by technology, ironically Zoom as well. And I heard an advert for a particular software a few days ago, and it was like, use this software, we can manage your team to the nth degree, was basically the message. Now, I would humbly suggest that isn't optimal in terms of performance. It wastes a manager's time and it breeds resentment, etc., in the whoever's been micromanaged. So one way to mitigate that micromanagement is trust. And compassion and a compassionate leadership done in a methodical and thoughtful way is essential to building trust. Just like I was saying about Google, what's the key element? It's trust and compassion, as opposed to, oh my God, I need to respond to my phone immediately because my boss thinks I'm a slacker, for example.
Yeah, micromanagement, it has become an issue, and you're right about the technology piece as well. Although I think many organizations feel that they've lost a bit of control when it comes to remote working. Now we're living in an age, Sean, which coming out of COVID, straight into a war. War is the ultimate manifestation of hate and violence, difference, cold-heartedness. War is the very opposite of compassion. What effect is this war and coming out of the pandemic? What effect is it having on people and organizations? What do you see coming down the tracks?
Yeah, well, one thing I might suggest first of all is one key concept within the science of compassion is darkness and light. We're all capable of doing bad things. We're all capable of doing good things. It's just varying degrees. So it's from a mindfulness point of view, it's technology reality. So yes, compassion is the opposite of war, but it also acknowledges the presence of war and having a responsibility to do something about that insofar as one can, which is obviously much easier said than done because I'm not a political analyst. So in terms of the economic situation we're coming into with the cost of living and rate of inflation and no doubt probably a very bad recession coming, I was thinking a lot about this, and a lot of companies respond by bunkering down. And I was thinking, what do I actually mean by that? That sounds a bit vague. So I was thinking it means they will focus on their core business and get rid of anything superfluous or window dressing. So I might, if I was a cynic, think of compassion or sustainability or diversity and inclusion as not superfluous, but there's a PR element to it. This fundamentally is a mistake. I would argue that the practice of compassion is actually core to the business because of all the points I made about maximizing the staff. So it's not superfluous, it's not window dressing, it's not trying to be nice or empty slogans. It's absolutely core to the business. So if you're going to focus on the core business, I would suggest compassion will need to be an element of that.
The mental health of employees has been an issue, but also executive teams. I remember writing an interesting piece on the mental health of CEOs. This is a concern for boards.
Yes.
What should board members be aware of to try and address this issue?
Well, I read some research the other day, and apparently, according to the World Health Organization, mental health issues account for $1 trillion of lost productivity. And that addressing those mental health issues insofar as you can and is appropriate and respectful. For every $1 you put, dollars because it's United States, for every $1, it produces $4 in productivity. So those figures are staggering. Yeah. So a board looking beyond oneself has to see those figures. Part of being compassionate is there's this myth that you're one person at work and one person at home, for example. But in reality, you're not. Everyone knows. You bring issues to work, you bring issues home, etc., etc. So if you bring your true self in a compassionate and safe environment, that would help, first of all, and that includes vulnerability. And lots of companies, I read somewhere that Starbucks, which might not have the, it has a certain type of reputation. It gives its staff who work 20 hours a week telehealth services and therapy work. Now that's amazing. So that not only affects those staff, but their families as well, because they're not like compartmentalized. So I would suggest that compassion would be a huge element of that, a huge part of it. It's not the whole answer, far from it, but it would be a huge element, including actually maybe mitigating some of the issues that are coming up.
Yeah. Your ambition in the area of compassionate leadership, what would you like to achieve in this field?
Well, I'm going to be bold. So I aim for all of the sectors in Ireland, the private sector, the public sector, the third sector, most of the organisations to embody compassion at a strategic level, and then in terms of day-to-day operations. And well, one way that will manifest itself will be actually creating cultures where people will love to work. You don't dread going to work, you don't hate going to work. Okay, reality is you're going to be bored and dislike certain elements, but you actually love the culture. And compassion done in a scientific and meaningful way will be absolutely crucial to that. So it's a bold ambition, but why not?
Absolutely, and boards and their relationship with company culture is extremely important. It's about making a difference, isn't it, for the people in the organization as well as the business?
Oh, completely. I mean, there's all these other areas like sustainability and ESG and diversity. It's all about not the obvious financial aspects, it's non-financial in one way of looking at it, which are inherent to the day-to-day operations of the business. And in that sense, they are actually inherent to the financial. It's a fake dichotomy. You look at a balance sheet and you might not see certain things, but it's like passion is about looking beyond the obvious and to the actual, what's actually generating the profits and the dividends, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and it would be amiss not to mention the current ESG trend, yes, being people, surely compassionate leadership.
Exactly.
This.
Exactly, and also it feeds into the governance aspect. And also even environmental. What is it? Environmental concerns is about looking beyond oneself, it's other beings and other future generations. That's why what's happening, for example, at the moment in Ukraine is appalling.
Yeah.
So surely companies, when people say the bottom line, yes, obviously that's really important, the numbers matter, but it's looking at behind that, what's generating those numbers, including for a longer term sustainable future. And a compassionate approach, I would suggest, would be one way of doing it.
Very good, very good. Sean, it's been fascinating talking with you today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Steve.
For our listeners and viewers, the links are on this webpage, just below this video. But it's been great talking with you, and certainly opened my eyes. So thanks very much.
Likewise. No, thank you very much, Stephen. Appreciate it.